Bisola felt uncomfortable with his actions, but she didn't know how to react. But things took a turn for the worse when Mr. John asked Bisola to sit on his lap, and she hesitated. She knew it wasn't right, but she also didn't want to disobey her teacher. However, Mr. John got angry and he slapped her hand for refusing. She couldn't hold back her tears. She felt scared and confused, unsure of what to do next.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, share, and comment. And as a matter of fact, I love you all.
Once upon a time in the bright city of Lagos, there was a couple named Daniel and Tope. They loved each other very much but loved their work and careers even more. They had been married for 3 years without any children. During this period of childlessness, several medical and local tests confirmed that both of them were fertile. Unknown to Daniel, Tope had been keeping a secret, but it all came out in the open one Friday afternoon. On this day, Daniel forgot an important document at home. When he rushed back to get it, his car key fell to the ground in the bedroom. Daniel got on his knees to pick up the keys, but as he reached for them, he accidentally pushed them further under the bed. As he crawled closer to retrieve the keys, he saw not only his keys but also a small box hidden underneath. The box looked strange to him, so he brought it out, thinking it might belong to his wife. As he staggered to his feet, the box slipped from his hands, and several contraceptive pills spilled out. Daniel couldn't believe his eyes. He picked up the pills, his anger boiling over as he realized how cruel his wife had been to him all these years. The lies, the deceit. He was still trying to process everything when he heard the door open. It was his wife, Tope. She greeted him, but he gave her a scornful look. Tope's gaze then fell on her secret box. "Daniel, I am so sorry. Let me explain," Tope begged, but Daniel left the room angrily and drove out of the house. Later that evening, he returned home and sat on the couch in their living room, his mind reeling with a mix of emotions. When Tope walked into the room, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Daniel felt a surge of anger wash over him. How could she have kept something so important from him for so long? He wanted answers, and he wanted to understand why she felt the need to deceive him. Tope's explanation hit Daniel like a ton of bricks. She explained that she needed 5 years to become the general manager at her office and couldn't risk getting pregnant, which could derail her career progression. In her mind, she had justified her actions, believing it was for the greater good of their future as a couple. But for Daniel, the revelation was like a slap in the face. All those times they had talked about starting a family, all those prayers they had said together for a child of their own, it had all been a lie. Tope had been actively preventing pregnancy without his knowledge or consent. Daniel's rage burned like a fire within him. He couldn't understand why Tope had chosen her career over their marriage, over their shared dreams and desires. He felt betrayed, hurt, and deeply wounded by her actions. He then gave Tope an ultimatum to choose between him and her career. But Tope pleaded with him not to make her choose. Daniel was resolute in his decision. He couldn't continue living in a marriage built on lies and deceit. Through tears and heartache, Tope finally relented. She agreed to stop taking the contraceptive pills and to try to get pregnant with Daniel. She wanted to salvage their marriage, to make things right between them. Daniel's heart softened as he saw the pain and regret in Tope's eyes. He wanted to believe that she truly loved him, that she was willing to put their marriage above all else. And so, he forgave her, embracing her in a hug as they both cried tears of relief and reconciliation. A few months later, Tope announced that she was pregnant, and Daniel's joy knew no bounds. He hugged her tightly, tears of happiness streaming down his face. "We are going to be parents, we are going to start our family at last," Daniel exclaimed joyfully. After 9 months of pregnancy, Tope gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and they named her Bisola. As Bisola grew older, her parents continued to excel in their careers. Tope became the general manager at her office, and Daniel opened more branches for his organic food business. However, they had little time to bond emotionally with their daughter. Many times Bisola gets to school very late, and it's always because of her parents' attitude. When Bisola was 8 years old, her performance in her academics worsened. She couldn't even manage to get minimum marks. The school proprietor invited Tope and Daniel to school to discuss their daughter's poor grade. "I don't know what is going on at home, but it's really affecting Bisola. She is always the last to come to school and it's affecting her grades." During their last test, Bisola couldn't get an ordinary 20%, the principal lamented. "It's our fault that she's been coming to school late, but we had no knowledge it's been affecting her academically," Daniel said, and Tope assured the proprietor that they would find an arrangement to ensure Bisola gets to school as early as possible. "That would be great, and please, I would advise you get her a lesson teacher to teach her after school. I believe this will help Bisola catch up fast enough academically," the proprietor added. Taking the principal's advice, Daniel and Tope spoke to Bisola's class teacher Mrs. Bose, and she also affirmed that Bisola had been performing woefully. They asked if she could recommend a good lesson teacher, and she took them to Mr. John. Bisola's parents spoke with him, and they had an agreement for him to give her extra lessons at home after school. They paid him instantly and gave him the address to their home. If only they knew they just invited the devil into their home. Ever since then, Daniel or Tope would pick Bisola from school by 4 p.m. and take her home to wait for her lesson teacher all by herself, while they went back to their place of work. Mr. John would get to their house by 4 p.m. to teach Bisola and leave by 6 or 7 p.m. with no parents at home. Tope is always the first to get home, mostly by 9 p.m. Daniel would come home by midnight. When they get back, they barely even have the time to eat before they rush to bed. Whenever Bisola wanted to share the interesting things that happened at school, her parents would always shut her up. "Please Bisola, I already had a long day, I need to rest," these were her parents' words. One day, Bisola's teacher was around for her lessons as usual, but today was different. As she sat at the small table in her living room, her textbook spread out in front of her, she noticed that Mr. John's behavior was different. He kept touching her hair, commenting on how soft and beautiful it was. Bisola felt uncomfortable with his actions, but she didn't know how to react. But things took a turn for the worse when Mr. John asked Bisola to sit on his lap, and she hesitated. She knew it wasn't right, but she also didn't want to disobey her teacher. However, Mr. John got angry and he slapped her hand for refusing. She couldn't hold back her tears. She felt scared and confused, unsure of what to do next. Bisola knew she had to tell someone about what happened, so when her parents returned home that night, she mustered up the courage to speak up. "Mommy, there is something I want to discuss with you," Bisola cried. However, to her dismay, they were too tired to listen to her. "Bisola, darling, you can see your mother is very tired," Daniel told his daughter. The next morning, Bisola tried again to tell her parents about Mr. John's inappropriate behavior. "Mr. John slapped my hand because," before she could finish this sentence, her mother shut her up, accusing her of being spoiled and seeking attention, while her father admonished her for disrespecting her teacher. "He is your teacher, respect him, you can't be rude to him like you do to us, of course he would correct you," Daniel said to her. Bisola felt frustrated and unheard, wondering if anyone would ever listen to her. As she sat at the breakfast table, pushing her cereal around absently, Bisola couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal. The people she trusted and looked up to the most had let her down. She felt lost and alone, struggling to make sense of the situation. The next time Mr. John came, Bisola couldn't look him in the eye. She was scared, and the events of the previous lesson replayed in her head. Today, Mr. John surveyed the compound, making sure nobody was around. He returned to where Bisola was seated and pounced on her. He warned her not to scream or else he would hurt her. And right there in her parents' house, Mr. John took advantage of her. Bisola wished the ground could open up and swallow her, but there was no one to help. Bisola's world shattered. She couldn't believe it was happening, and the fear that gripped her that they never seemed to leave her. Every time he visited, her heart raced in terror. This was a nightmare she couldn't escape. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. John's visits became more frequent, and Bisola felt herself sinking deeper and deeper into despair. She tried to push him away, to scream for help, but his threats silenced her every time. She was trapped in her own house, a prisoner to his desires, with no one to turn to for help. This continued for months, with Bisola feeling more and more isolated and alone. She couldn't bear to look at herself in the mirror, couldn't bear the shame and guilt that consumed her every single moment. She felt as though she was cursed, doomed to suffer in silence, while the man who had taken everything from her continued to visit, day after day. Her parents were oblivious to what was happening, too caught up in their own lives to notice the sorrow and anguish that their daughter was going through. She longed for someone to see her, to reach out a helping hand and rescue her from the nightmare she was living in, but there was no one, just the endless cycle of terror and fear that seemed to have no end in sight. She tried to gather the courage to speak up, to tell someone what was happening to her, but the words caught in her throat every time. The fear of what Mr. John would do to her if she revealed the truth kept her silent, kept her trapped in her own personal hell, and so the torment continued, each visit more horrifying than the former. Bisola felt her spirit breaking, felt herself slipping further and further away from the person she used to be. One morning Tope came to wake her daughter to get ready for school, but she was taken aback when she discovered that Bisola had wet her bed, as she believed that her daughter had long outgrown this behavior. She scolded her and punished her, thinking that it was just a one-time incident due to playing too much before bed. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of a much bigger issue that would soon come to light. When the proprietor of Bisola's school called Tope and Daniel in for a meeting, they were shocked to learn that their daughter had been repeatedly found with her school uniform soaked with urine. The principal mentioned that Bisola had confided in her, revealing that she couldn't control her urination. This revelation left Tope and Daniel frozen with worry and confusion. They were at a loss as to what could be causing their daughter's sudden inability to control her urine. Desperate to find a solution, Tope and Daniel decided to limit Bisola's water intake, thinking that perhaps she was simply drinking too much liquid. While this was going on, Mr. John continued raining terror on Bisola as usual. The urine issue also persisted, which caused Bisola so much embarrassment. At school, her classmates would mock her for wetting herself, causing her to retreat to the bathroom to cry in pain. It was heartbreaking for Tope and Daniel to witness their daughter's distress and humiliation. Realizing that they needed to seek professional help, Tope and Daniel took Bisola to the hospital to see if there was a medical reason behind her sudden problem. After explaining to the doctor, several tests were carried out and the doctor invited Tope and Daniel to his office. He told them to wait while he called social services, the police and a therapist. Tope and Daniel were confused as to why the doctor made those calls. They were further alarmed when the doctor started asking them crazy questions such as if their daughter was staying with them. He asked about Bisola's daily routine, who she sees and relates with. The doctor's tone was serious and stern, causing the couple to exchange worried glances. Tope's heart raced as she wondered what could be wrong with their daughter, Bisola. "What is the problem, doctor? Please tell us," Tope asked. As the doctor began to speak, Tope could feel her palms sweating and her breath becoming shallow. The words seemed to echo in her mind as the doctor revealed the shocking news that as a result of the test carried out on their daughter, several tears were found in Bisola's private part, which showed she had been abused. Their world shattered in that moment, and they felt as though they were falling into a bottomless pit. Tears ran down Tope's cheeks as she processed the information the doctor had just given. She felt a surge of nausea and disbelief wash over her, unable to comprehend how someone could harm her precious daughter in such a despicable way. Daniel reached out to hold her hand, his own face contorted in a mixture of rage and despair. The doctor's words hung in the air like a thick cloud of dread. Tope's head pounded as she asked herself a million questions. What had she missed? How could she not have seen the signs of her daughter's suffering? The room seemed to spin around Tope and she fainted. When Tope was revived, the social services, therapists and police had arrived. The police questioned Daniel and Tope, trying to get to the bottom of the issue, his eyes boring into them, judging them silently for failing to protect their own child. After the interrogation, Bisola's parents rushed to speak to their daughter, begging and urging her to tell them who did this to her, but Bisola couldn't speak. She bursted into tears. Her parents joined her. It was a sorrow-filled evening for them. Bisola was too scared to talk and the therapist offered to speak to her. She asked Bisola's parents to leave the room and urged Bisola to talk to her freely. "He will hurt my parents and if I talk," Bisola cried, but the therapist assured Bisola that she was safe now and that there were measures in place to protect her and her family from any harm. Bisola finally opened up, revealing the horrifying truth of what had been happening to her. The therapist listened attentively, her heart breaking with each word that came out of Bisola's mouth. The young girl had been enduring unspeakable things at the hands of her teacher, Mr. John, for way too long. The therapist fought back tears as she listened to the harrowing details of Bisola's story. She asked Bisola why she didn't tell her parents, and Bisola said she tried to tell them at the beginning but they didn't understand her, and when it was too late she was scared because Mr. John threatened to harm her. The therapist gave her a big hug and assured her Mr. John wouldn't go unpunished. She went out of the room and spoke to Daniel and Tope. "When you knew you weren't ready, why did you bring a child to the world?" The therapist lashed at Bisola's parents. "What did she say?" Tope asked in tears. The therapist then narrated everything Bisola told her about how she suffered in the hands of her abuser. Tope and Daniel listened in horror. They couldn't believe it had all been happening right under their nose, in their house. They knew they had failed their daughter in the worst possible way, allowing her to suffer in silence while they remained oblivious to her pain. Daniel boiled with anger while Tope wept bitterly. "Oh my poor baby," Tope cried. "You are a big disgrace to parents and I promise Bisola will be taken away from you," the therapist shouted before walking away from them. Tope and Daniel ran to talk to their daughter in the hospital room. When they entered the room, they found Bisola curled up in a ball, tears streaming down her face. Tope rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her daughter and whispering words of love and support. Daniel stood back, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He wanted nothing more than to find Mr. John and make him pay for hurting his daughter. The therapist gave the full account of what had happened to the social service officer, Mrs. Janet. She listened intently as the therapist finished her account, her expression grave and serious. Mrs. Janet understood the gravity of the situation and the urgency of taking action to ensure Bisola's safety. She assured the therapist that she would do everything in her power to make the animal, Mr. John, pay for his crimes. The next day the police went to Bisola's school and as soon as Mr. John saw them approaching him, he ran out of the classroom he was in and escaped through the back of the school. The police looked everywhere for him but to no avail. While the search for Mr. John was going on, the police investigated by speaking to all Mr. John's extra lesson students, and as the investigation progressed, more shocking revelations came to light about Mr. John's behavior. Out of the 13 students under his tutorship, Mr. John has been abusing 11 of them. It was revealed that he had been using his position of authority to manipulate and control the vulnerable students, grooming them for his own twisted desires. The students had been too afraid to speak out against him, fearing the consequences of going against their teacher. Many of them said Mr. John warned them that no one would believe them if they spoke out against him. All the parents of the other victims were notified. All of them were devastated by the news, some grappling with feelings of guilt and anger over not being able to protect their children from harm, while some blamed the school. They struggled to understand how someone they had entrusted with their children's education could betray that trust in such a vile manner. Some parents threatened to sue the school. "You will pay for this," one angry parent told the school proprietor. It was a sad day at the school, as the terrible secrets came out in the open. Whispering was the order at every corner, from students to their teachers. In the coming days of the scandal, the school's reputation was tarnished, with many parents withdrawing their children from the institution out of fear for their safety. Eventually, the school was closed down for 2 months to help the police investigate better while the search for Mr. John, the Beast, continued. The police worked tirelessly to track down Mr. John, following up on leads and interviewing witnesses in an effort to bring him to justice. However, he remained elusive, evading capture at every turn. Tope and Daniel were devastated when social service took away their parental rights and ordered them to take mandatory parental classes if they were ever going to get their child back. While all this was going on, poor Bisola went through a series of operations to help her heal better. For months she remained at the hospital. Her parents were only allowed supervised visitation throughout this time. Tope and Daniel became shadows of themselves, abandoning their work and business, praying day and night for the full recovery of their only daughter. They blamed themselves and felt guilty for what their daughter has been through and is still going through. Despite their struggles and emotional turmoil, they remained committed to doing whatever it took to get Bisola back. They attended the parental classes diligently, taking notes and asking questions to ensure that they were absorbing the information and putting it into practice. At the same time, they made sure to visit Bisola as often as they could. Seeing her hooked up to machines and enduring painful procedures was heartbreaking for them. They would hold her hand, sing her favorite songs, read her stories and hope to be one day able to take her home. 2 months later, the police search for Mr. John finally yielded good fruit when they got a tip from an anonymous caller who had spotted the Beast in another state. The police moved swiftly and truly Mr. John was found in a village in the said state. He tried to injure a police officer in order to escape but was outnumbered and overpowered. John was taken to the station and was quickly arraigned before the end of the week, all thanks to the governor of the state who got deeply involved and ensured justice was not delayed. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial, with curious onlookers eager to witness the proceedings. The judge presided over the case, listening to the arguments presented by both the prosecution and the defense. John was found guilty and on the final day of the verdict, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Months passed, and Bisola showed signs of improvement. Her surgeries were successful, and she was slowly but surely getting stronger. Tope and Daniel were overjoyed at the progress she was making. During one of their supervised visits, Tope and Daniel were approached by the social worker, Mrs. Janet, who had been monitoring their progress in the parental classes. She commended them for the positive changes they had made and informed them that they were on track to reunification with Bisola. The news was like a ray of hope in their otherwise dark situation. Tope and Daniel felt a renewed sense of determination and purpose as they continued to work towards bringing their daughter back home. Bisola started her therapy sessions right there in the hospital and her parents were there every step of the way to help her heal properly mentally and emotionally. Some days were tough on Bisola. She detested the times she had to recount the evil that had before her, but there was no room for healing without facing one's demons. Bisola faced it all, and although there were days she cried, but she was strong enough to pull through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tope and Daniel received the news they had been waiting for. They had completed the required parental classes, demonstrated their commitment to being better parents, and provided a stable and loving environment for Bisola to return to. Social services agreed to reunite the family due to the great help of Mrs. Janet. Tope and Daniel were overjoyed. The day Bisola was discharged from the hospital was a day of celebration for the entire family. Tope and Daniel showered her with love and affection, grateful for the chance to make up for lost time. They vowed to never take their family for granted again and to cherish every moment they had together. In the coming years, Daniel and Tope worked hard to pursue their respective careers, but they never placed anything above their child like they did before. They had learned their lesson from the past and vowed to always prioritize their daughter's needs, giving her their undivided attention and listening ears. She was the light of their lives, and they made sure to spend quality time with her every day. One weekend, Daniel surprised Tope and Bisola with tickets to a zoo. Bisola's eyes lit up with excitement as she saw the animals up close for the first time. She ran from exhibit to exhibit, asking endless questions and marveling at the wonders of nature. Her parents watched her with pride, happy to see her so full of joy. As they sat down for lunch, Bisola suddenly became quiet. Tope noticed the pensive look on her face and asked her what was wrong. Bisola hesitated before speaking, but eventually opened up about feeling anxious about starting school the following week. Daniel and Tope exchanged a knowing glance before Daniel took Bisola's hand in his and reassured her that she had nothing to worry about. They promised to always be there for her, no matter what challenges she faced. Bisola's fears began to fade away as she listened to her parents' comforting words. She smiled gratefully at them, feeling loved and supported in that moment. Daniel reached across the table to ruffle her hair affectionately, while Tope wiped away a stray tear from her eye, touched by their daughter's vulnerability. When they arrived home, Tope carried her daughter to her bed and tucked her in, planting a gentle kiss on her forehead. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching the tender scene unfold with a mixture of pride. This was their family, their sanctuary of love and understanding. As they settled down for the night, Daniel wrapped his arm around Tope, pulling her close. They exchanged a silent vow to always prioritize their daughter's well-being above all else, to never take her for granted or overlook her needs. They had learned their lesson from the past and were determined to be the best parents they could be, creating a nurturing environment where Bisola could thrive and grow, and they spent the rest of their lives fulfilling this promise. Bisola grew up to be a beautiful woman and became a prestigious lawyer in the nation. Thank you so much for watching. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do like and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on any of our amazing stories.